Hey guys, we're gonna hit the cost of a thing or how to value something today in this one. And a couple points I wanted to hit are how do you determine value? What does cost actually mean? Um, what is purchasing power of the thing you're using to buy something with? How much faith do you have in that thing? And then I wanted to give a quick example from Hurricane Harvey. Um, so how do you value something? Economists will tell you it's what someone's willing to pay, but I think that puts into perspective a problem with the way the world is viewed, and that is if a person's willing to pay something, an exorbitant rate, for example, for something, the theory said you should sell that. You should sell that to them, and this is they try to check this with the idea of ethics. Okay, so if somebody were to want a bottle of water, for example, for $100 because they were dying of thirst, it's most people would say it's unethical to sell that to that person, because if you have the power to give it to them in order to sustain their life, you should do it. The interesting thing is, as you start to price goods and services and value these things, you really start to understand if you don't look at the person that you're transacting with as a person and you look at them as an economic transaction, the problem is you lose the framework of how do you price anything. It may have cost you, let's say $10 to produce a pen, and you want to sell it at a profit. Well, this particular pen, let's just say somebody tweets about it, Donald Trump tweets about it, or Oprah says this is the best pen in the world. You could theoretically charge more money for that because the demand of that thing is going to go up. The question, I think, the real question people should ask themselves is that right? Should you, if you were selling your pen for $11, so you're making a 10% profit margin, should you charge $20 for your pen, 100% profit margin? And this is what economies of old and scripture talks about, like usury. When you charge such an exorbitant interest rate or such an exorbitant profit margin that it is literally taking advantage of somebody, and for things that may be considered a utility or maybe considered a luxury, that there's a difference there. I don't really think there is. And in my business dealings, you see it all the time. People constantly try to work people in order to try to get the most value they possibly can out of somebody, even if it damages the relationship, even if it doesn't even matter. Whereas other companies like Chick-fil-A and USAA and these companies that literally do put their customers first. I mean, I saw an article about Chick-fil-A when the power went out at one of their stores, and rather than say, okay, we can't sell you any chicken because we can't run the credit card machine, that manager decided, no, I'm going to fulfill all the orders. Now, that may, on an economic basis, look crazy because you're not exchanging the dollars for your goods or service. But if you couch it in the sense that these people are people, and they come here for lunch, maybe they only have an hour, maybe they only have half an hour, they come to Chick-fil-A because the service is quick, it's good, it's consistent, people are kind and friendly, and now they're here to consume their lunch and head back to work, and you're like, okay, I can't do this because my credit card machine is down. You risk making that customer so angry that they don't come back. But on the other side, what if you just fulfilled the orders, which is what this manager did? The goodwill that you build from something like that is almost immeasurable. It's really hard to value. That goodwill in its nature is difficult to value, and that's where it comes down to cost. So, what is you can talk about opportunity cost, but what is the real cost of something? The cost in that example of Chick-fil-A was, I don't know, a few $1,000s worth of lunches, but the repetitive business that manager made, not just for his store, but just for the brand of Chick-fil-A, will pay off in dividends down the road. And that's the thing that's so difficult to understand. These short-term haircuts that you as a person selling something would take in this scenario will benefit in the long run. But the problem is what what has happened with corporations and the way a worldly person thinks is that you have to extract as much value as you possibly can. And the only reason, now here's the crazy part, the only reason why you would do something like that is because of the dividend. It's because of it will pay off later. That in and of itself is better than just haircutting somebody when they come to your store to consume your good or service. But it still reeks of transactional. I'm only doing this because I know you're going to come back. I'm only doing this because I know that in the long run, I'm going to make more money off of you. I read this article from an economist saying the reason Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays is to create scarcity. I thought that's such a strange concept because creating scarcity in a fast food restaurant business is not what you're trying to do. You're trying to sell volume. You're not trying to sell based on having limited supply. You want to meet every need you possibly can so that you get as many consumers as possible. They're missing the point that the owners of Chick-fil-A said, I'm going to give my employees at least one day off a week so they can go worship and be with their families. That was a decision that was made, that they're going to financially harm themselves by not working on Sundays in order to treat their customers and their employees right. Now, this brings up an interesting topic about purchasing power, for example. Whenever somebody talks about what something costs or what something's valued, they're always using some measure, some sort of unit to measure that value. What we use in America is typically dollars or gold standard or Bitcoin these days, or even the consumer price index. And what is interesting here, I came across this St. Louis Fed data. What's really interesting about this is the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar on average in the cities since 1910, basically. And you can see that dollar has decreased from 1,000 down to 39. Said another way, that has decreased. The purchasing power of $1 has decreased 96%. Okay, well, why does that matter? Well, couch that against the price of goods. Now, the CPI index only goes back to the 40s, but as we see the price of goods increase, we go from 100 to 250. We have a 250% increase in the cost of goods. Now, let's look at wages. This is what's really interesting. Wages down here. This is this little red. Let's zoom in. This is this little red line. Since 2006, have only increased by, starting at 20, ended at 28. So you have an increase in 40% on wages. You have a decrease over that same period of time in purchasing power from 50 down to 38, which is a 20% decrease. And then you have an increase in goods and services of 20%. So you have a 20% increase of goods in goods and services cost price. You have a 40% increase in wages, but then, which would offset that. But then you have a massive drop from 47 to 40 of 20% of the purchasing power of that dollar. Now, why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because what's really happening is the more money you make, that doesn't necessarily mean the value of your dollar is appreciating. It actually means it's depreciating. And this shows up in all kinds of interesting ways. Wendy's, for example, used to sell a 5-piece. There was a while there they went to a 4-piece for the same price. I can remember even Chick-fil-A decreasing the size of their chicken, McDonald's decreasing the size of their patties and their buns in order to combat this problem where the dollar doesn't carry the same purchasing power as it once did. And so that brings up this concept of faith. If your money is decreasing in value and prices are rising, if wages on average can't keep up, you're basically creating this rift. You're creating a scenario where basic goods and services are no longer available to the average person. That's what's essentially going to happen. We'll look at healthcare costs on average here in one of the upcoming videos. But what's interesting is it forces you into this question of how much faith do you have in this system? How much faith do you have in this idea that this thing that you work for and that you trade your time for is going to carry and sustain value? That's where COVID, negative interest rates, all this stuff starts to come to a head. If you stop believing that, or if you start to say, okay, I'm going to look for an alternative method of goods and services, one that doesn't move, or one that's not manipulated as much, or not manipulated at all, or where I can set the value of that thing, you create a problem for one, state governments and local and national governments, of course, but the world itself, because they are pegging value largely against what the U.S. dollar is valued at. And that measure of value is what's so interesting. I thought about this one time. Imagine taking a meter stick. There's an official meter stick. There's an official kilogram in the UK. You can go look it up. It's really interesting on just how they make sure that the kilogram always remains the same. It's a little ball, always remains the exact same mass. And what's really, if you start to really think about it, what do you measure value against? Or in other words, what do you measure truth against? It'd be weird to walk into a butcher, for example, and say, I need a pound of beef, and they gave you what was only 8 ounces, and you're like, no, I needed a pound. You're like, no, this is a pound. Look at the scale. It says pound. Well, the scale was not calibrated correctly. That forces a distrust into the system that the people who are using the system are going to say, this is kind of wild. And the minute you start to have somebody push and say, hey, this is a problem, wake up to this issue, look at this other way to do it, you start to see that the way things are valued and the way we as a society value things and people is kind of upside down. And here's an example. So Harvey happened a few years ago here in Houston. And our church, along with a ton of other religious organizations, just hit the road. We just went out and found people that needed help and helped them. There was no value, there was no money, there was no exchange, there was no economic or financial incentive for us to go do that. We gave our time and our effort and our sweat and our talents and our tools to go out and our money to go out and help these people. And if you tried to tag a value to that, I mean, think about the thousands of people that here in Houston, 50, 100 millions of people affected. Same with Beaumont. Same with the Golden Triangle over there in East Texas, down towards Victoria. Without people willing to just get up and go because it's the right thing to do, you have a massive problem. I read somewhere it was like 85% of the relief aid came from religious organizations. That is so difficult to tag a dollar value to. It really becomes sort of an exercise in futility. And when you start to think about value as it pertains to what is actually measuring that value, if that thing used to measure the value is being shifted around all the time, you at some point will start to think about this in a way that I can't trust this system. I can remember my dad telling me he would go get a burger and fries for a nickel. I can remember paying 80 cents, $12 for a tank of gas. The way things have decoupled themselves, price versus wages, how money moves, the idea that money is slowing, the velocity of money is slowing down, you would expect that to increase the value of a dollar, which would by definition decrease the price. If the value of a dollar is increasing, it should decrease the value, the cost of whatever goods or services you're consuming. But it's not happening. The value of a dollar keeps decreasing while prices keep increasing. It's this weird scenario. Let me know what you guys think. If you've ever heard of this, drop me a comment. We'll see you on the next one.